So recently, Macrumors sifted through technical information posted by a private account on Twitter who has been credible in the past, and they posted some interesting news regarding the iPad 11, so let's dive right in. I feel like we've accepted it's a given at this point the iPad 11 is going to get a new chipset, the iPad 10 gave us a new design, and so it makes sense to update the chipset and call it a day, right? Right? Well, apparently not, because this news source seems to suggest the iPad 11 is going to continue using the A14, and I'm very confused. And the plot thickens because the model number the source shared apparently doesn't align with the model number we expected for the iPad 11, and so this could mean two possibilities. One, and I think this is most likely, this is not the iPad 11, this is a new HomePod instead. We have heard a lot about a new HomePod that's supposed to rival products like the Google Home Hub and Amazon Echo Hub, and so it's very possible that could be the product that's being referred to, since a HomePod with a display is essentially an iPad with a stick attached on the back. I know HomePods as of late have been using Apple Watch chipsets, but considering this has its own display and a much more complex UI, I could see Apple using the A14. The second possibility that could explain why the model number is so unique is the fact it could just be a modified iPad 10. I know this is unlikely, but there was a new China exclusive iPad 10 released pretty recently that had eSIM support, so could this leak just be late to that news and is only releasing info regarding that now? It's a possibility in my opinion. You know what else I also foresee being a possibility? You subscribing to the channel, of course! I apologize for the horrible segue, but I would greatly appreciate it. It would bring you the latest commentary about the world of Apple right to subscription box, so please consider it. The button is below. We're trying to hit our next milestone of 16,000 subscribers, so join the Saranbyte gang now. But okay, let's just assume this is the iPad 11 and the chipset doesn't change. Does this actually make sense? Well, yes, you could argue it does, because Apple has done this in the past. When Apple went from the iPad 6 to the 7, it stayed on the A10 chipset, and so Apple could be doing the same here, but do remember the iPad 7 gave us a larger display as the main upgrade, whereas the iPad 11 likely isn't getting any sort of display upgrades. I guess it would be nice if we got more RAM with the same chipset on the iPad 11, but I also have my doubts about that because Apple currently doesn't produce any products with the A14 and 6 gigs of RAM. In fact, only the iPhone 12 Pro had this combination, but that's been long discontinued, and the iPad 10 only got the A14 in the first place because it was recycling the iPhone 12's motherboard with the same A14 and 4 gigs of RAM that they were still selling in 2022. It's why I thought it made plain sense for the iPad 11 to get the A15, since it's a no-brainer decision logistics-wise. You see, currently the A15 is being used on a wide range of products like the Apple TV, iPhone 13, iPhone SE, iPhone 14, and the iPad mini, so I'm sure it's going to be simpler and cheaper for Apple's supply chain to allocate this widely produced chipset to the base iPad as well, but this leak goes completely against that. Really, the only way Apple could justify keeping the A14 is if there are plans to significantly lower the price, and when I mean significantly, I mean back to $329. If the iPad 11 directly replaces the iPad 9 at the same price point, I won't even care if Apple doesn't change anything. Pricing was absolutely the biggest issue with the iPad 10, and yes, there have been plenty of discounts from third parties as of late, but directly offering this on the Apple Store for $329 would be absolutely incredible, and I totally would be fine with the A14 staying here if the price got significantly reduced. At the end of the day, it's still a decent chipset and should handle everything the average consumer does on the base iPad perfectly fine. Now you may be asking, if we're not getting the only upgrade we were expecting, how exactly will this iPad 11 be different to the iPad 10? Well, one thing I could definitely see them making a huge fuss about is Wi-Fi 6E support, even though most consumers don't have Wi-Fi 6E routers to take advantage of the better speeds, but also I can see them updating the colors. At the end of the day, I think that's what most regular consumers care about anyways. I thought the iPad 10 was horrible value, but I've seen many people buy this over older superior iPads just because it came in a fancy pink, blue, or yellow. So I'm sure Apple can just resell the same products again by repainting them in some new snazzy colors. So yes, at the end of the day, guys, whether we see the A15 or not, the iPad 11 is going to be a very minor refresh, but you still may be wondering about the release, so let's talk about that. Unfortunately, it seems we might have to wait another 6 months or so till we get this new base iPad. Like Minchiko had recently mentioned, a report from Nikkei Asia also seems to suggest the iPad 11 won't be releasing till the second half of this year, so most likely we're going to see this in September alongside the iPhone 16. Now I'm still quite surprised about this because the base iPad is undoubtedly the most popular iPad, and so 2 years without a refresh is certainly odd. Now you may be wondering at this point, how the hell does Nikkei Asia know this? Are they just making random predictions in the hopes of being right? Well, I wish that was the case, but no, they are pretty spot on with their rumors in the past because they do have legit sources in the supply chain. And this time they found out about this tidbit regarding the iPad 11 because Apple's apparently working with China's BYD, who assembles iPads, to move new product introduction resources to Vietnam. Now, if you're wondering what the heck new product introduction resources mean, well, I also don't know. But thankfully for me, I can use the powers of Google and read this off a teleprompter. So NPI refers to Apple working with suppliers on the design and development of new products to ensure they can be made properly in a new manufacturing plant. This will be the first time they do this process outside of China apparently, especially for a core product, but it makes sense they're doing this considering Apple is not going to be changing the design much with the iPad 11. It's just going to be recycling the iPad 10's chassis for the most part, but now with some fancy colors. Anyways, the really technical details continue because engineering verification for test production of the iPad 11 started in mid-February, and so once test production goes smoothly, they can of course mass produce these a few months prior to release. So I guess a September release does make sense, but I'm still hoping we see it earlier. I mean, Quo was the first one to tell us about this, and he's notorious for being a bit iffy with his timelines. So whilst this is just a mere prediction from some guy on the internet, I wouldn't be surprised if we did see the iPad 11 much earlier via press release. I know I just regurgitated a bunch of production information that would go against this, but consider that number one, previous budget iPads have released early in the year during spring, and number two, we do have the iPad Air Pro refreshes coming out in May, and so dropping a new iPad 11 alongside that doesn't seem to be too unrealistic, but watch how I'm gonna be wrong either way. Anyways, let me know your thoughts in the comments, and make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this, and thank you for watching. So today I want to revisit the MacBook M2 in 2024 because Apple surprised us by keeping this in the range alongside the M3 model, and honestly I feel like it's hands down the better buy, and I'll explain why I think this in today's video. Now FYI, I will be including the 15-inch M2 MacBook Air in this review as well, considering the larger model so similar, but do remember that's not officially sold by Apple anymore, so my review is mainly